So I've cut off the exhaust on this. It was pretty rotten already anyway, so I just cut it at the manifolds at the front. I broke in the center, and I basically just removed the catback system out of it, as we're not going to use this. Remove the front and rear cross numbers for the drive shaft. Going to mark those just in case we use those later for the build. I'm not sure if we will, but either way, they may have to go back in to stiffen the body, keep everything tied together, as we are putting a lot more power to this. Next up is the drive shaft removal, and then we should be good under here for now. Drive shaft is out. It's an interesting three-piece drive shaft from front to back. But, that is gone. Exhaust is gone. Basically, you're ready to move up to the top and start tearing into the motor. We spent a few hours yesterday getting the motor, transmission, whatnot out of the flex. Myself and Ed did that. Had to remove a few things, obviously dropped the cradle out of the car, get that out of the way, then the motor came out from underneath of it. So looking closely at the motor here, there's definitely a giant hole in the side of the block. Obviously blew right through it. The previous owner said that he had lost some oil. Obviously, there's a giant window in the side of the block, so this thing's obviously no good. It's actually very, very big, this motor transmission. Once it's out, everything's complete here. What we're planning on doing is actually, I have a weigh scale coming. We're going to weigh this motor transmission setup as it is currently sitting here, compare it to the Coyote setup with the transmission we decided to go with, just to see what the weight differences are. It's a lot of weight over the front axle if you actually look at it, kind of the way it's set up in here. Just everything is literally over the front of the axle, so it's very like nose heavy. So I'd be interested to see what the differences is, and then also putting the motor back a little bit in the engine bay, you know, closer to the firewall with a proper transmission in it, kind of under the tunnel and whatnot. So we are going to face a few challenges. We've already kind of figured out what we're kind of up against. The first is the brake booster and master cylinder setup. It's not in the most ideal spot typically of like a normal sports car. Usually it's like to the driver's side a bit more, but because of the strut tower and all that, so we're gonna have to figure out a way to switch up the brake system a little bit here to gain some more room for the valve covers and head and stuff that obviously on a typical V8 is, you know, kind of in the way. So a little bit of engineering and figuring out how we're gonna work all that stuff. Also have a little bit of issue with how the rear AC lines run kind of through the tunnel and whatnot. So we're going to have to fix that, maybe reroute some of that stuff as far as getting the AC to the back of the car. I'm not super critical of it if it doesn't work out, as long as we have some type of AC in the car. That's all that matters. This thing has a lot of windows, a lot of sunroofs, so I'm not super worried about that. We've already removed the front wheel drive setup out of it. We just cut the shafts for now. Obviously we got to figure out a permanent solution of how to get all that to work, just kind of as a stub or whatever you want to call it. Some suspension components we got to replace as well. Another big hurdle we're going to face is this cradle and the sway bar. This model does come with electronic power steering, so we do have this giant motor that's attached to the steering rack. I have looked into previous gen models like the 09 to like 12 models. They came without electronic power steering, so depending on if it will work or not and the bolt pattern is the same, we may have to convert to a 09 to 12 power steering rack just to fix this issue. We may have to modify, you know, a few things down here. Sway bar may be another one that we may have to figure out as well, because it's right in line with the transmission, tunnel, I guess, all that stuff there. So that's going to be a big one for sure. We may have to do a different sump oil pan as well on this, just depending on where the engine actually falls at. But we do have quite a bit of room, like front to back in this thing. It's pretty roomy, so we might be able to bring the motor forward just a little bit, and then hopefully the transmission and bell housing kind of clear up and over some of that stuff. Got to figure out a radiator situation. This is a pretty good sized rad and the fans are pretty adequate for this thing, so we may be able to run this rad. I don't know if the EcoBoost model has a larger rad or if it's the same rad. I got to look up the part number on that and see if it is or not, but I think there might be adequate cooling on this to cool, you know, the V8 at this point, because these are very large diameter fans on here. So we may be good just to use this whole setup that's in the front here already and not have to really tinker with it too much. Looking also at the fuel pump situation, the EcoBoost is a different fuel pump on this, so I may have to upgrade the fuel pump from the standard 3.5 that's in this thing, the NA1, to the EcoBoost style, which obviously it's more power and whatnot, so it obviously is a bigger fuel pump. I'm not sure if anybody knows of any upgraded fuel pumps for these Flexes or if they even make anything, but if so, let me know. As far as the diff goes, we got to find out what gear ratio it is. The rear axles on this thing are very, very small compared to the front. Obviously, there's probably more power to the front wheels on these things because of the ratio on them. So we got to look at that as well and hopefully figure something out as far as an axle solution. If not, we got to swap to a different axle because those will not last very long, looking at what's there. We're also looking at upgrading the brakes. As I said, these brakes, they're a good size. They're the bigger HD brakes on this thing. StopTech makes a Z36 kit for this thing, which is all brand new slotted and drilled rotors, brand new calipers, which works out good because they're already powder coated red. We're going red on the vehicle, so it's works out perfect. Probably do some braided lines and then just upgrade to some Motul 5.1 brake fluid on this thing just to get this thing to stop really good. Looking at possibly doing BC racing coilovers as well. It seems like it will give us the most room to run some bigger wheels. I've been looking at some 20x9 wheels in the front and some 20x10.5s in the back just to get a good staggered fit. This thing obviously is going to need a little bit of traction with a V8 in it now and whatnot. So that's kind of what we're looking at. And then also the transmission itself, the 6R80 that we were kind of planning on going with is a rather big transmission. We'd have to do some pretty extensive cutting, I think, on the firewall as well as the trans tunnel, and then I think it may be a big issue with this power steering and the sway bar. So we may end up having to go with a Tremec TKX on this thing. I know, unfortunately, a manual and a Ford Flex with a V8. Terrible idea, but I think the TKX itself, I've done a few swaps on some hot rods and muscle cars and stuff, and they're a very, very small transmission for what they are. 5-speed manual. I mean, they can take the power. You can get upgraded ones. The biggest thing is we're going to have to figure out a pedal setup, whether we get that out of a Mustang, or we find like a Kugel setup where it's kind of an under dash setup where it has the master cylinder, the clutch reservoir, everything kind of mounted under the dash. That may be the case for the brake booster as well. Depending on the room under the dash, we may have to do an under dash setup to clear. So it's a few hurdles we got to get over here to get this thing kind of ready for the V8 swap. But now that everything's out, we have a good idea of where everything is, you know, the room we have. I mean, obviously we got to figure out exhaust as well, so that'll be a little bit. So we're probably gonna end up just running a factory style manifold. If we do a Coyote Mustang motor, we'll probably just use the factory headers on those things because they're a tubular style shorty manifold kind of already. So probably just do that, bring it down, and then just hopefully run it straight out the back. It's a pretty nice layout underneath for the exhaust. So we can do like a dual 2.5-3 inch system right at the back, do some nice boiler mufflers on it with some nice tips at the bumper. So I have a good game plan. It just, we got to start figuring out some stuff and what's going to fit and what's not going to fit. So stay tuned.